She hid the twins from the billionaire CEO, but he tracked her down at the store buying baby formula. "I've been looking for you, Zara." The words hung in the air of the empty pharmacy aisle, freezing her in place as she clutched the baby formula to her chest like a shield. "How did you find me?" Her voice trembled despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Did you really think you could hide my children from me forever?" Roman's voice was dangerously soft as he stepped closer, his expensive cologne filling the space between them. 3 months, Zara. 3 months of their lives I can never get back. You made it crystal clear that children weren't part of your 5-year plan, she whispered, backing away until her spine hit the cold metal shelving. Your exact words were, "I need a partner who understands my priority has to be the company." "That was before I knew I had a son and daughter," he said, his amber eyes flashing with something that looked almost like pain beneath the anger. "They're not assets for your corporate empire, Roman." "No," he agreed, his jaw tightening. "They're my flesh and blood, and I want to see them. Now, have you ever wondered what drives a mother to hide her children from their powerful father? Or what happens when that carefully constructed secret life comes crashing down in the fluorescent lights of a pharmacy at 2 a.m.? Hi, my beautiful sisters. Sometimes, life presents us with challenges that seem impossible to overcome. You may have faced moments where you were pushed to make tough decisions for the ones you love, or maybe even felt like you had to hide your strength to protect your heart. But let me remind you today, you are enough. The love you give, the strength you carry, and the choices you make, no matter how hard, are what define you. You have the power to rewrite your story, to heal from past wounds, and to embrace the beautiful future you deserve. Never let anyone, especially someone who didn't understand your worth, make you feel small. You are powerful, you are worthy, and you are loved. I'm Mr. Harrison, and today's story will take you into the heart of a battle between love and fear, wealth and survival, and the unexpected journey of 2 people who must find a way to put their children first, even when they can barely stand to be in the same room. If you've ever faced an impossible choice between your heart and your head, give this video a like. And if you believe that sometimes the hardest decisions come from a place of love, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales for more stories that will move your soul. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour pharmacy cast harsh shadows across Zara Caldwell's exhausted face as she scanned the nearly empty shelves. It was 2:17 a.m., the only time she dared venture out for essentials these days. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the last 2 cans of hypoallergenic formula, the specialized kind that Arya needed for her sensitive stomach. "Please be enough until payday," she whispered, calculating costs in her head while glancing nervously toward the store entrance. 6 months of looking over her shoulder had become second nature. The twins were with Mrs. Patel from downstairs, the only person Zara trusted with her precious 3-month-olds. The elderly widow had become a surrogate grandmother, offering to watch Jackson and Arya during these necessary midnight runs without asking questions about why a new mother was so afraid of being seen in public. As Zara placed the formula in her basket alongside diapers and infant Tylenol, the pharmacy's automatic doors slid open. The sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body, a Pavlovian response to potential danger that had become all too familiar. She didn't need to look up to know who had entered. The sudden stillness of the air, the way the night clerk straightened his posture, the subtle scent of custom cologne that once represented safety but now triggered terror, all announced his presence before his voice did. "I've been looking for you, Zara." Roman Sinclair stood at the end of the aisle, his 6'3" frame impeccably dressed despite the hour in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was shorter than when she'd last seen him, but his eyes, those penetrating amber eyes that had once made her feel like the only woman in the world, remained unchanged. Cold, calculating, determined. "How did you find me?" Her voice emerged steadier than she felt, one hand instinctively moving to shield her basket with its telltale baby supplies. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" Roman's voice was soft, almost gentle, making it all the more terrifying. He took a step forward and she matched it with a step back. "I have resources, Zara. When you disappeared from the hospital before I arrived, it was only a matter of time." The night she'd fled the maternity ward haunted her still, signing herself out against medical advice just hours after an emergency C-section. The taxi ride across town with newborns who had no car seats, the pain tearing through her abdomen with every breath. But fear had been a more powerful motivator than physical agony. "You have no right," she managed, though they both knew it was a lie. Legally, he had every right. The twins carried his DNA, even if he hadn't known of their existence until a nurse had called to congratulate him on becoming a father. No right. Something dangerous flickered across Roman's face. "You disappeared with my children. Children I didn't even know existed until some stranger called to tell me you'd given birth." Another step forward. 3 months, Zara. 3 months of their lives I can never get back. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the aisle too narrow. Zara felt trapped, cornered like prey. "You made your position on children very clear when we were together. That was before." "Before what?" Her voice rose slightly, drawing a curious glance from the night clerk. "Before you realized they could be useful? Before you needed heirs for the Sinclair empire? They're not corporate assets, Roman." His jaw tightened, the only visible sign that her words had hit their mark. "I want to see them," for simple words that collapsed her world. This moment, the one she'd been running from since the pregnancy test had shown positive, had finally arrived. Roman Sinclair, billionaire CEO of Sinclair Industries, had found his children. And Zara knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. "They're sleeping," she said, a final, futile attempt to delay the inevitable. "I've waited 3 months." His voice softened, revealing a glimpse of the man she'd once loved beneath the powerful exterior. "I can wait until morning. But I'm not disappearing, Zara. Not now. Not ever again." The weight of those words settled between them like a physical presence. In the harsh pharmacy lighting, with baby formula clutched against her chest like a shield, Zara faced the truth she'd been running from. The careful life she'd constructed in hiding had just shattered beyond repair. Roman took another step forward, close enough now that she could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the only indication that perhaps he hadn't been sleeping well either. "We have a lot to discuss." "Not here," she whispered, suddenly aware of how public this confrontation was becoming. "My car is outside. We can talk there." Zara hesitated, years of caution warring with the reality of her situation. Roman had found her. The game of hide and seek was over, and she had lost. Whatever came next would determine not just her future, but the futures of 2 innocent babies who deserved better than the broken legacy of their parents' relationship. "I need to pay for these first," she finally said, lifting the basket slightly. "Arya needs the special formula." Something shifted in Roman's expression at the mention of his daughter's name. "Arya," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "And my son, Jackson." "Jackson and Arya," he said softly, and for a moment, Zara caught a glimpse of something unexpected in his eyes. Not the cold calculation of a man viewing children as possessions, but something more vulnerable, something almost like wonder. The moment passed quickly as Roman reached for his wallet, extracting a black card that the night clerk would probably frame after they left. "I'll take care of this. I can pay for my children's needs," Zara protested, pride flaring despite her precarious position. "Our children," Roman corrected, his tone making clear this was not a point he would concede. "And this is the least I can do after missing 3 months of their lives." The quiet accusation hung between them as the clerk rang up the items. Zara knew she should feel guilty for keeping the twins from their father, but all she could remember was the conversation that had ended their relationship a year ago. "Children don't fit into my 5-year plan, Zara," Roman had said dismissively when she tentatively broached the subject of their future. "Sinclair Industries is at a critical expansion phase. I need a partner who understands that my priority has to be the company right now." She hadn't told him about the pregnancy test hidden in her purse during that conversation. His words had made her decision for her. Now, watching him pay for formula and diapers with the casual ease of a man who had never worried about money, Zara wondered if she'd made the right choice. Not in leaving him, that had been necessary for her own survival, but in keeping the twins' existence secret for so long. As they exited the pharmacy, the cool night air carried the scent of impending rain. Roman's car waited at the curb, not the ostentatious sports car he'd driven during their relationship, but a discreet black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who remained invisible behind the wheel. "Where are they?" Roman asked as the driver opened the rear door. "With a neighbor," Zara replied, clutching the pharmacy bag to her chest. "I need to get back to them. I'll drive you." It wasn't a request, and Zara didn't have the energy to argue. As she slid into the leather interior that smelled of wealth and privilege, memories flooded back. Of charity galas on Roman's arm, of weekend getaways to private islands, of feeling like Cinderella in a fairy tale that was never meant to last. They had met 2 years earlier at a charity auction where Zara, then a rising interior designer, had donated her services. Roman had outbid everyone for a complete home redesign, paying 10 times the market value. When he'd approached her afterward, she'd expected to discuss color schemes and furniture styles. Instead, he'd asked her to dinner. "I don't actually need my penthouse redesigned," he'd admitted over wine at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. "I just wanted to meet the woman whose portfolio showed such extraordinary vision." "So you spent $50,000 on a charity auction item you don't need?" She'd been both impressed and slightly appalled by the casual display of wealth. Roman had smiled, that rare genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I got what I wanted, and children with cancer got funding for treatment. I'd call that a worthwhile investment." That night had been the beginning of a whirlwind romance that swept Zara off her feet. Roman Sinclair, 35 and already worth billions, pursued her with the same single-minded determination that had built his tech empire. Private jets to Paris for dinner, helicopter rides to secluded beaches, rare books that matched her literary interests. His courtship was as lavish as it was thoughtful. For Zara, who had grown up in foster care after losing her parents in a car accident at age 7, Roman's world seemed like a dream. Not because of the luxury, though she couldn't deny enjoying it, but because of the stability it represented. The certainty, the safety she'd never quite found in her nomadic childhood. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Roman had told her one night as they lay tangled in silk sheets in his penthouse. "You see past all this." He gestured to the opulent surroundings. "You see me," and she had. Beneath the powerful CEO exterior, Zara had glimpsed the driven, lonely boy who'd built an empire to prove his worth to parents who had never shown him unconditional love. She'd fallen for that man, the vulnerable one behind the boardroom mask, even as she'd wondered if loving him might eventually break her heart. For a while, it had seemed possible that their different worlds could merge into something beautiful. Roman had given her the key to his penthouse after 3 months. She'd moved in after 6. Her design business had flourished with connections from his social circle, allowing her to hire staff and take on high-profile projects. They'd talked about the future in vague, promising terms. Until the night she'd brought up children. The SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb, carrying them toward a confrontation 9 months in the making. In the quiet darkness of the back seat, with Roman's presence beside her both familiar and foreign, Zara finally asked the question that had haunted her since seeing him in the pharmacy. "What do you want, Roman? Really want?" He turned to look at her, his profile sharp against the passing streetlights. For a moment, the powerful CEO facade slipped, revealing something raw and honest beneath. "I want to know my children," he said simply, "and I want to understand why the woman I thought I knew would disappear rather than tell me I was going to be a father." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the calculated approach she'd expected, the opening move in a legal chess game she was destined to lose. This sounded almost like hurt. "You made it clear children weren't in your plan," she reminded him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Plans change, Zara." His hand moved across the seat, not quite touching hers but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "People change." Rain began to fall, gentle drops against the windows creating a cocoon of sound around them. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a warning of the storm to come. As the SUV turned onto her street, Zara realized she was about to bring Roman Sinclair into the modest apartment where she'd been hiding with his children. The worlds she'd fought so hard to keep separate were about to collide. "They look like you," she said suddenly, needing him to know this one thing before everything changed. "Jackson has your eyes. And Arya, she has your determination. She's tiny but fierce." Roman's breath caught audibly. For a man who commanded boardrooms and brokered billion-dollar deals without blinking, he seemed momentarily undone by this simple description of his children. The SUV stopped in front of her building, a far cry from the luxury high-rise where she'd lived during their relationship. As the driver opened the door, letting in the sound of falling rain and the reality of what came next, Roman finally reached for her hand. "I'm not here to take them from you, Zara," he said, his fingers warm against her cold ones. "But I won't be kept from them either. Whatever happens next, we figure it out together." The sincerity in his voice made her want to believe him. But as they stepped into the rain, heading toward the building where two sleeping babies were about to meet their father for the first time, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of the most important battle of her life. And Roman Sinclair had never lost a battle he was determined to win. If you're wondering how someone could hide twins from their billionaire father for 3 months, hit that like button. The choices we make from fear can sometimes lead us down paths we never imagined. The stairwell to Zara's third-floor apartment smelled of curry and damp concrete. Roman said nothing as they climbed, but she felt his assessment of her living situation in the slight tightening of his jaw, the careful way his eyes catalogued every detail. The peeling paint, the flickering hallway light, the distant sound of a couple arguing behind paper-thin walls. "It's not what you're used to," she said defensively as she fumbled for her keys outside apartment 3C. "I grew up in a place worse than this," he replied quietly. "Before my first startup took off." The reminder of his self-made status, something she'd always admired about him, caught her off guard. It was easy to forget that Roman Sinclair hadn't been born into wealth, that he'd clawed his way up from poverty through sheer brilliance and determination. Before she could respond, the door opened to reveal Mrs. Patel, her silver hair braided for sleep, her kind eyes widening at the sight of Roman towering behind Zara. "You found her," the elderly woman said simply, surprising both of them. Roman's eyebrows rose. "You knew who I was?" Mrs. Patel gave him a look that managed to be both gentle and reproachful. "Your face is on business magazines at the grocery store. And those babies have your eyes." She stepped back, allowing them entry. "They're still sleeping. Been angels tonight." The apartment was small but meticulously organized, every inch of the 700-square-foot space maximized for functionality. A living room that doubled as Zara's workspace. A tiny kitchen with formula supplies drying on a rack. And through an open door, the soft glow of a night light illuminating two cribs pushed close together. Roman stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on that light, his breathing suddenly shallow. "Go," Mrs. Patel urged, taking the pharmacy bag from Zara's hands. "He should meet them even if they're sleeping." Zara nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs as she led Roman toward the nursery. She'd imagined this moment 100 different ways during her pregnancy and the months that followed. Sometimes with dread, sometimes with a secret, shameful longing for the twins to know their father. But none of her imaginings had prepared her for the reality of watching Roman Sinclair step into the small bedroom and see his children for the first time. He moved with uncharacteristic hesitation, his usual commanding presence diminished by something that looked almost like fear. At the cribs, he stopped, his hands gripping the rail as he looked down at the sleeping infants. Jackson lay on his back, one arm flung dramatically over his head, his dark hair, so like Roman's, sticking up in all directions. Beside him, Arya slept curled on her side, tiny fists tucked under her chin, her expression serious even in sleep. "They're perfect?" Roman whispered, the words sounding as though they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. Zara stood back, arms wrapped protectively around herself, watching as Roman reached down with trembling fingers to touch Jackson's cheek. The baby stirred but didn't wake, turning his head slightly toward his father's touch. "I missed everything," Roman said, his voice rough with emotion. The birth, their first cries, the first time they opened their eyes. You said you didn't want children, Zara reminded him, though the accusation lacked its earlier heat. I said they didn't fit into my 5-year plan. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the dim light. I never said I didn't want them. The distinction hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. Instead, Roman turned back to the cribs, his attention now on Arya, whose tiny form seemed even smaller next to her brother's. The doctor said she's perfectly healthy, just small, Zara offered, answering his unspoken concern. She needs the special formula because of reflux, but she's gaining weight steadily now. Roman nodded, absorbing this information with the same intensity he applied to business reports and market analyses. And Jackson? He's healthy too. Yes, he's in the 90th percentile for height and weight. The pediatrician says he'll be tall like you. A ghost of a smile touched Roman's lips. My father was tall, and his father before him. He paused, still looking at the twins. Family traits, genetics. It's strange to see parts of yourself in someone else. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with emotions neither had expected to feel. In the other room, they heard Mrs. Patel moving quietly, preparing to leave now that her charge was complete. I should go thank her, Zara said, reluctant to leave Roman alone with the twins but needing a moment to compose herself. Zara. Roman's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for giving me children this beautiful. The simple gratitude, so at odds with the anger and accusations she'd expected, brought tears to her eyes. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and went to see Mrs. Patel out. The elderly woman was putting on her cardigan in the living room. That man has had a shock tonight, she said quietly. But I see good in his eyes when he looks at those babies. He's angry that I kept them from him, Zara replied, helping Mrs. Patel with her sweater. Of course he is, as he should be. Mrs. Patel's directness was one of the things Zara valued most about her. But anger passes. Love for children doesn't. I'm afraid he'll try to take them from me, Zara admitted, voicing her deepest fear for the first time. Mrs. Patel patted her cheek gently. Then you must give him reason not to want to. Show him that these children need both their parents, not just one or the other. After Mrs. Patel left, Zara returned to the nursery to find Roman sitting in the rocking chair beside the cribs, his tall frame looking incongruously large in the small wooden chair where she spent so many hours nursing and soothing the twins. We need to talk, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the sleeping babies. Not here, she whispered. They'll wake soon for their feeding. We can talk in the living room. He followed her out, closing the nursery door partway behind him. A parental instinct that seemed to come naturally despite his newness to fatherhood. In the living room, the distance between them expanded again, the brief connection they'd shared in the nursery giving way to the reality of their complicated situation. Why didn't you tell me? Roman asked, standing by the window that overlooked the street below, his back to her. When you found out you were pregnant, why run instead of just telling me? Zara sank onto the worn sofa, suddenly exhausted beyond words. You had just told me in no uncertain terms that children weren't part of your plan, that your company needed your full attention, that you needed a partner who understood your priorities. So you decided for both of us, without giving me a chance to adjust to the idea. You've never been a man who adjusts to anything, Roman. You control. You dictate. You arrange the world to suit your vision. She looked up at him, years of pent-up emotions finally finding voice. I was terrified of what would happen if I told you, that you'd either force me to terminate the pregnancy or take the babies once they were born and push me to the sidelines. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Is that really what you thought of me? That I'd force you to abort my own children? Or that I'd take them from their mother? I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that I was pregnant with twins, alone, and the father of my children had just made it crystal clear that family wasn't on his agenda. Roman moved to sit in the armchair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. In the soft lamplight, with his suit jacket discarded and his tie loosened, he looked less like the intimidating CEO and more like the man she'd fallen in love with. "I've spent the last 3 months imagining every possible scenario," he said quietly. "Why you left, where you might have gone, whether you and the baby, I didn't know there were two, were safe, healthy, cared for." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Do you have any idea what that's been like? To know I had a child somewhere in the world that I couldn't protect, couldn't provide for?" The genuine anguish in his voice pierced through Zara's defensive armor. "How did you find out? About the pregnancy? I mean, a nurse from the hospital called to congratulate me. Apparently, you listed me as the father on the birth certificates." A hint of his earlier anger resurfaced. "Which was your one decent act in this whole mess." "I never intended to deny them their identity," Zara said softly. "I just needed time. Space to figure out how to be a mother without being overshadowed by your everything." She gestured vaguely at him, encompassing his wealth, power, and commanding presence. "And now that I found you? What's your plan, Zara?" Before she could answer, a thin cry came from the nursery, followed quickly by a second, more demanding wail. The twins were awake, their timing as impeccable as it was inconvenient. "I need to feed them," Zara said, rising from the sofa. Roman stood as well. "I want to help." The simple statement, offered without demand or condition, caught her by surprise. She studied his face, looking for the calculation or manipulation she'd expected, but found only a father's desire to know his children. "Okay," she said finally, "you can help. If you've ever had to put aside your own feelings to do what's right for a child, give this video a thumbs up. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important breakthroughs." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Zara showed Roman the basics of infant care. He watched with intense concentration as she demonstrated how to change Jackson's diaper, his hands hesitant but gentle when it was his turn with Arya. When Zara prepared bottles, he observed the precise measurements for the special formula, asking questions about Arya's reflux with the same focused attention he'd give a critical business briefing. "Support her head like this," Zara guided, adjusting his arm as he held Arya for her feeding. "She likes to be held close." Roman cradled his daughter against his chest, his large hand nearly spanning her entire back. Arya's tiny fingers curled against the fine fabric of his shirt as she drank hungrily from the bottle. "She has a good appetite for someone so small," he observed, a note of pride in his voice. "She's determined," Zara replied, settling into the rocking chair with Jackson. The nurses in the NICU called her the Mighty One. Roman's head snapped up. NICU? They were in intensive care. Zara realized her mistake too late. There was so much he didn't know, so many details of the twins' birth and early days that she'd navigated alone. They were premature. 34 weeks. Jackson was fine after a few days, but Arya needed help with breathing and feeding for 2 weeks. The muscle in Roman's jaw tightened. "You went through that alone." It wasn't a question, but Zara answered anyway. "Mrs. Patel helped, and the hospital staff was amazing." "That's not the point." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger simmering beneath. "You were alone because you chose not to tell me. Our children were in medical distress, and I didn't even know they existed." Arya sensed the tension, fussing slightly in his arms. Immediately, Roman's focus shifted back to his daughter, his voice softening as he murmured reassurances. The ease with which he adapted to her needs surprised Zara. This was a man who expected the world to adapt to him, not the other way around. "I made a choice based on what I knew at the time," Zara said quietly, stroking Jackson's cheek as he drank. "I'm not saying it was the right choice, but it was the only one I could see." Roman didn't respond immediately, his attention on Arya as she finished her bottle. With an instinct that seemed to come from somewhere primal, he lifted her to his shoulder and patted her back gently, exactly as Zara had shown him. "Where did you go?" he asked finally. "After you left the penthouse that night?" "To a friend's at first. Then I found this place when I was about 5 months along. Zara adjusted Jackson in her arms. I had some savings, and I've been doing freelance design work that I can do from home. And medical bills? These two couldn't have been cheap. Zara's chin lifted slightly. I had insurance through my design firm, and I've managed. Managed? Roman repeated, the word laden with everything he wasn't saying. The Roman Sinclair she knew didn't manage. He thrived, conquered, dominated. The concept of his children merely managing was clearly intolerable to him. Arya let out a surprisingly loud burp, breaking the tension. A smile tugged at Roman's lips, the first genuine one Zara had seen since he'd appeared in the pharmacy. "That's my girl," he murmured, and the simple pride in his voice made something twist painfully in Zara's chest. They finished the feeding in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they tended to the babies. When both twins were changed, fed, and drowsing again in their parents' arms, the inevitable conversation could no longer be postponed. "I have a proposition," Roman said, his voice low to avoid disturbing Arya, who had fallen asleep against his chest. Zara tensed. Here it came, the ultimatum, the legal threats, the reminder of his unlimited resources and her vulnerability. "I'm listening," she said cautiously. "Move back to the penthouse. Both of you, all three of you." He met her startled gaze steadily. "The East Wing is separate with its own entrance. You'd have complete privacy, your own space. The twins would have everything they need, and I'd be able to see them daily without disrupting their routine." Of all the scenarios Zara had imagined, this hadn't been one of them. "You want us to live with you? As what? Your house guests?" "As the mother of my children and my children," Roman replied simply. "No strings. No expectations beyond allowing me to be part of their lives. And if I refuse?" His expression hardened slightly. "Then we do this the hard way. Through lawyers and courts and custody agreements that will drain your resources and still ultimately result in me having significant access to my children." There it was, the threat she'd been waiting for, the reminder of the power imbalance between them. And yet, beneath the steel in his voice, she heard something else. Not manipulation, but desperation. The plea of a father who had just discovered his children and couldn't bear the thought of being separated from them again. "I need time to think," she said, rising carefully with Jackson to place him back in his crib. Roman followed with Arya, laying her down with a tenderness that belied his imposing presence. "The sun will be up soon," he observed, glancing at the window where the first hints of dawn were lightening the sky. "I'll have my driver bring breakfast at 8. We can talk more then." It wasn't a request, but neither was it a demand. It was Roman doing what he'd always done. Taking charge, making arrangements, moving pieces on the board to create the outcome he desired. "Fine," Zara agreed, too exhausted to argue. 8 o'clock. At the door, Roman paused, turning back to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "For what it's worth, you've done an amazing job with them. They're healthy, clearly well-loved. You're a good mother, Zara." The unexpected praise caught her off guard, warming something inside her that had been cold for too long. "Thank you," she managed. After he left, Zara stood in the quiet apartment, listening to the twins' soft breathing from the nursery. The night's events felt surreal. Roman finding her, meeting his children, offering a solution that was both generous and self-serving. Typical Roman, seeing a problem and immediately engineering a fix that aligned with his interests while appearing to accommodate hers. Moving to the penthouse would solve her financial struggles and give the twins access to the best of everything. But it would also place her back under Roman's influence, in his space, subject to his rules and expectations. The very situation she'd fled when she discovered she was pregnant. And yet, watching him with the twins, the genuine wonder in his eyes, the natural way he'd held them, his immediate concern for their health and well-being, had forced her to question her assumptions about what kind of father he would be. The Roman she'd known had been brilliant, driven, occasionally ruthless in business, but also capable of surprising tenderness in private moments. He'd never been cruel to her, never manipulative in the way she'd feared when she ran. Her decision to hide the pregnancy had been based on his stated priorities and her own insecurities, not on any actual evidence that he would be a bad father. Had she misjudged him? Made a catastrophic error that had deprived her children of their father and Roman of the chance to know them from birth? As dawn broke over the city, Zara curled up on the sofa, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. In a few hours, Roman would return, expecting an answer to his proposition. And she had no idea what that answer would be. True to his word, at precisely 8 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found not Roman but his driver, laden with bags from an upscale breakfast place and, more surprisingly, 2 large boxes from an exclusive baby boutique. "Mr. Sinclair sends his apologies," the driver explained, setting the bags on her kitchen counter. "An emergency board meeting called him away. He asked me to deliver these and to tell you he'll be here at noon." After the driver left, Zara investigated the boxes, finding designer baby clothes in precisely the right sizes, more of Area's special formula than she could have afforded in a month, and a state-of-the-art baby monitor system that probably cost more than her rent. Attached was a note in Roman's distinctive handwriting. "For our children. No strings attached regardless of your decision. R." The gesture was both thoughtful and calculated, addressing immediate needs while demonstrating what life with Roman's resources could mean for the twins. As she fed them in their new outfits, Zara couldn't deny how much easier certain aspects of parenting would be with Roman's wealth behind them. But money wasn't everything, and ease wasn't the only consideration. What kind of father would Roman actually be? Would he see the twins as individuals to nurture or as extensions of himself to mold in his image? Would he respect her role as their mother, or would he gradually edge her aside with his dominant personality and unlimited resources? At noon, another knock came. This time, when Zara opened the door, Roman stood there himself, looking slightly rumpled by his standards. His tie askew, faint shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept any more than she had. "I brought lunch," he said, holding up bags that smelled deliciously of her favorite Thai restaurant, a detail from their past he'd apparently remembered. "Come in," she replied, stepping aside. "The twins are napping." Roman set the food on the small dining table, his eyes taking in the apartment in daylight, the worn furniture, the carefully organized baby supplies, the design sketches pinned to a corkboard above Zara's small desk. His gaze lingered on a framed photo of the twins in the NICU, tiny and vulnerable in their incubators. "I missed so much," he said quietly. "Yes," Zara acknowledged, unable to deny the truth of it. "But they're only 3 months old. You haven't missed their first words or steps or all the big milestones still to come." Roman turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "Is that an opening for negotiation I hear?" "It's an acknowledgement of reality," she corrected, moving to the kitchen to get plates. "They're your children too. Keeping them from you completely was never going to be a long-term solution." "Then you'll consider my offer? Moving to the penthouse." Zara set the plates on the table with more force than necessary. "I'll consider a custody arrangement that allows you to be part of their lives without uprooting mine completely." Roman's jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately argue, a restraint that surprised her. Instead, he began unpacking the food, the familiar routine of their many shared meals creating an odd sense of déjà vu. "Tell me about the birth," he said as they sat down to eat. "I want to know everything." The question caught Zara off guard. She'd expected demands, negotiations, perhaps even threats. Not this simple request to share an experience he'd missed. "It was intense," she began hesitantly, picking at her pad thai. "My water broke at 34 weeks. I was terrified." As they ate, Zara found herself telling Roman everything. The emergency C-section when Aria's heartbeat became erratic, the first time she'd held Jackson while Aria remained in intensive care, the nights she'd spent sleeping in a chair beside the NICU incubator, determined that her daughter wouldn't be alone. Roman listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed his need to visualize these moments he'd missed. When she described the twins' first night home, how she'd barely slept, checking their breathing every few minutes, something in his expression softened. "You did all of this alone," he said, not as an accusation this time, but with a kind of wondering respect. I wasn't entirely alone, Zara admitted. Mrs. Patel has been amazing, and there's a single mother support group at the community center that helped with practical things. Still, Roman set down his fork, his food barely touched. It should have been me helping you through those nights, driving you to doctor's appointments, worrying with you when Arya was struggling. The regret in his voice seemed genuine, making Zara question again whether she'd misjudged him so completely. Why did you really say you didn't want children? She asked suddenly. Was it truly just about the company's expansion? Roman was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the photo of the twins. My father was not a kind man, he finally said. Success was the only acceptable outcome in our house. Failure was met with consequences. His jaw tightened at some private memory. I told myself I'd never put a child through that pressure, and the easiest way to ensure that was to not have children at all. You're not your father, Roman, aren't I? He looked at her directly, driven, demanding, focused on achievement above all else. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. The difference is that you recognize it, Zara said quietly, and you have a choice about what kind of father you want to be. Before Roman could respond, a cry came from the nursery, Arya's distinctive wail that always preceded Jackson's by a few minutes, as if she were the designated alarm clock for her brother. Perfect timing, Zara said with a small smile, rising from the table. You're about to experience the twins' least charming hour. They're always fussy after their midday nap. To her surprise, Roman rolled up his sleeves and followed her without hesitation. Show me what to do. The next 2 hours were a crash course in the realities of parenting twins. Arya refused her bottle, arching her back and screaming until Roman, on instinct, began walking her around the apartment, patting her back in a rhythm that somehow calmed her immediately. Jackson, not to be outdone, produced a diaper blowout of epic proportions that required an emergency bath, soaking both Zara and the bathroom floor in the process. Through it all, Roman remained unflappable, handling each crisis with the same focused determination he brought to business deals. When Jackson began wailing during his bath, Roman simply removed his expensive watch, rolled his sleeves higher, and stepped in to help, heedless of the water soaking his tailored pants. By the time both babies were clean, fed, and contentedly playing on their activity mat, Zara found herself seeing Roman in an entirely new light. This wasn't the controlling CEO she'd feared would take over parenting as he did everything else. This was a man discovering the messy, unpredictable joy of caring for his children, willing to be soaked, spit up on, and completely derailed from his schedule in the process. You're good with them? She admitted as they watched the twins batting at colorful hanging toys. Better than I expected. They make it easy, Roman replied, his eyes never leaving his children. They're perfect. The simple statement, delivered with such genuine wonder, cracked something open in Zara's heart. This was the Roman she'd fallen in love with, the man capable of complete devotion beneath his controlled exterior. I've been thinking about your proposition, she said carefully. Roman turned to look at her, his expression guarded. And I won't move to the penthouse. That chapter of our lives is over, and I need my independence. She held up a hand when he started to object. But I'm willing to consider a different arrangement. A place of our own, the twins and me, close enough that you can be part of their daily lives. Shared custody, with boundaries we both agree to respect. You'd need financial support, Roman said, his mind already working on practical details. A suitable place in a good school district. Childcare when you return to work. Healthcare. Education funds. I'm not asking for your money, Roman. They're my children, he interrupted, a flash of the old commanding Roman surfacing. Providing for them isn't optional for me. It's non-negotiable. Zara studied him, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when they came from a place of genuine care rather than control. Fine, she conceded, but I maintain my career, my independence. My role as their mother isn't diminished by your involvement. Agreed. Roman's quick acceptance surprised her. I don't want to replace you, Zara. I just want to be their father. The simplicity of the statement, stripped of legal threats and power plays, resonated with the truth. Whatever their past, whatever mistakes had been made on both sides, they now shared the most important connection possible. Two small lives depending on them both. We'll need to establish some ground rules, Zara said, already thinking ahead to the practical challenges of co-parenting with a man accustomed to having his own way in everything. I'm open to negotiation, Roman replied, a hint of his old smile appearing. Contrary to popular belief, I can compromise when properly motivated. Arya chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, drawing both parents' attention back to the activity mat where she had managed to grasp a dangling star. Her triumphant expression was so comically proud that they both laughed. A shared moment of parental joy that bridged the chasm of hurt and misunderstanding between them. She gets that from you, Zara said softly. That look when you accomplish something difficult. And Jackson has your focus, Roman observed, watching his son methodically batting at each toy in sequence. Your attention to detail. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching their children discover the world with fresh wonder. The apartment that had felt so tense and charged earlier now held a different energy. Not the rekindling of romance, but the tentative foundation of a partnership built around the twins. I was wrong not to tell you about the pregnancy, Zara admitted finally. Whatever my fears, you deserve to know. And I was wrong to make you feel that children weren't part of my vision for the future, Roman countered. I spoke from fear, not truth. It wasn't quite forgiveness, not yet. There were too many hurt feelings, too many missed moments to be so easily reconciled. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of mistakes on both sides and a commitment to do better for the sake of Jackson and Arya. 6 months later, Zara stood in the kitchen of her new townhouse, watching through the window as Roman pushed the twins in their stroller around the small private garden. At 9 months old, they were thriving, Jackson already trying to pull himself up to stand, Arya babbling constantly in what seemed like her own private language. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been arguments about schedules, parenting philosophies, and boundaries. Roman's tendency to solve problems by throwing money at them had clashed with Zara's desire for the twins to have a grounded childhood despite their father's wealth. His workaholic habits had required adjustment to accommodate the unpredictable demands of infant care. But there had also been unexpected moments of grace. The night Arya had spiked a fever and Roman had stayed awake with her until dawn, refusing to leave even when Zara insisted she could handle it. The Saturday morning Zara had arrived to find Roman and Jackson both asleep on the nursery floor, surrounded by building blocks after an apparently epic play session. The gradual realization that they were, despite everything, becoming something like a family, unconventional, still healing, but united in their love for the twins. The townhouse had been a compromise, close to Roman's office but in a neighborhood Zara loved, with a garden for the twins and a home office where she could continue her design work. Roman had insisted on buying it outright and putting it in Zara's name, a gesture of security for the twins that had finally convinced her he wasn't trying to control her through financial dependence. Their custody arrangement had evolved organically, Roman taking the twins 2 nights a week at his penthouse, which now featured a fully equipped nursery, and spending most evenings at the townhouse for dinner and bedtime routines. They weren't a couple again, but they had become something perhaps more important. Partners in the most significant project of their lives. Outside, Roman looked up and caught Zara watching. He smiled. Not the calculated charm he showed the business world, but the genuine expression she'd first fallen for years ago. He pointed to something in the garden, and both twins turned their heads to look, their matching dark curls catching the sunlight. In that moment, Zara felt a peace she hadn't expected to find when Roman had confronted her in that pharmacy 6 months earlier. The fear that had driven her to hide her pregnancy, to flee the hospital, to live looking over her shoulder. It had transformed into something else. Not trust exactly, that would take more time to fully rebuild, but faith in the future they were creating for Jackson and Arya. As she stepped outside to join them in the garden, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a midnight confrontation in a pharmacy aisle to this peaceful afternoon, they had navigated a path neither could have anticipated. "Mama!" Jackson called when he saw her, his newest word still thrilling every time she heard it. "They've been watching butterflies," Roman explained as she approached. "Arya tried to catch one." "Of course she did," Zara laughed, kneeling beside the stroller to kiss each twin's cheek. "Never met a challenge she didn't like." "Wonder where she gets that from," Roman murmured, his eyes meeting Zara's with warmth and understanding, as the twins babbled excitedly, pointing at butterflies and reaching for their parents with complete trust. Zara realized that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most unexpected destinations. She had run from Roman out of fear for her future and her children's. Yet here they were, creating a family that honored both parents' strengths while putting the twins' needs at the center. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined when she'd first fallen for the brilliant, complicated billionaire. It was something more real, more hard-won, and ultimately more valuable. A family built on honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance at all, but about the transformative power of becoming a parent, of discovering that your heart can expand in ways you never imagined possible to make room for the tiny lives that depend on you. For Roman and Zara, the twins had become the bridge across their differences, the common ground where two strong-willed people could meet and build something beautiful together. If the story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever had to overcome fear to do what's right for someone you love. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to set aside our pride and work together for something greater than ourselves. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us of our shared humanity.